Nate, where would you want me to actually begin?
Well, for the video, let's start with your name and what branch of military you were in.
Okay, I'm Thomas Huber. I spent a 27-year career in the United States Army, retired as a lieutenant colonel. I spent 5 years active duty and 22 years reserve time for a total of 27 years. I would do it again. It served me well to give me a much broader outlook on the entire world. And I was commissioned a second lieutenant out of IUP here in Indiana in 1967. I was commissioned a combat engineer, which I had no technical background, but the Army sometimes says at that point in 1967 they needed engineers, so I became an engineer. In September of 1967, I entered active duty at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, to complete the Army's 9-week engineer officer basic course. And the Army made an engineer out of me in 9 weeks. And that included things like road and airfield design and construction, bridge design and construction, explosives and demolitions training, along with infantry tactics, the things that everybody else learns in the Army. And we had a week at Fort A.P. Hill, Virginia, for what is called the tactical training of the individual soldier. People crawling the infiltration course with the machine gun firing over top of it. That was part of the tactical training of the individual soldier. I did crawl the infiltration course through the mud and the rocks and the glass and the snakes.
The glass and snakes?
Oh yeah, well there was under the barbed wire while the machine gun's firing 3 feet over your head. And you can hear those rounds going over your head. But that tells you, you meet a snake, don't stand up. And that was part of it. You know, we did chemical weapons warfare training. We learned the effectiveness of our protective masks. We did night training with the night vision. At that time, they didn't have night vision goggles. They had the starlight scopes, so you could actually see at night without light. And excuse me, and we also did our survival training at that time, survival, escape, and evasion, where we were broken down into groups of 5, and at 9 o'clock in the evening, we were dropped off the back of a truck. The only thing we had was a small flashlight, a compass, and a map of the area. We had 3 days to traverse 25 miles through rough terrain, mountainous in southern Virginia, wooded terrain, and evade people out there that were trying to capture us. And if we got captured, they could pull us back to their interrogation point. And I wasn't captured, so I don't know. I was told they used electrodes on parts of the body to shock people into telling the truth, that type of thing. And they threw people into snake pits to just, you know, if you're not telling them what you want them, that's a little bit of torture. But our group made it the whole way, and we made it within about 4 hours to spare. And there was pouring rain at one point, which made it nice. It deadened the sound in the woods. If you're going to be in stealth, have it pouring rain. No sound of leaves crunching under your feet, no sound of twigs, so we could move faster while it was pouring rain. They say anything that results in less than serious injury or death is good training. So if they put you out there, and the joke is, they train you to be miserable. You don't know how to be miserable on your own. So they have to train you how to be miserable in the worst weather conditions as you can possibly be. Mud up to your knees or your waist, 120 degree temperatures, 45 degrees below zero in the winter. They put you out in it, and you're out in there for days at a time. You learn how to be miserable and still do the job. That's part of the training. They specifically, in boot camp or advanced training or officer training, whatever, they teach you sleep deprivation. By that, they keep you up for hours and hours and hours and hours. And they if you can catch an hour's sleep or maybe 2 hours sleep. Then they jolt you out and do things. They extend you to your absolute limit of physical ability, emotional ability. And when you're at the absolute limit, they throw another requirement on you. That you have to pull together as a team and do it. That's what combat is. Combat doesn't take a holiday or a break. When you're out there and you're at your absolute wit's end, you can't relax. You have to be prepared to be ambushed, shot at, whatever, and then you have to be able to react appropriately. That's what the Army does. It breaks people down and builds them up to work as a team, to follow orders. That's what you can't question when somebody says you have to do this. You just learn to follow orders. My first assignment was in Berlin, Germany. That's when they still had the wall, the Iron Curtain, and we were 110 miles behind the Iron Curtain in West Berlin. I look back as probably one of the more interesting assignments I could have ever had, because we dealt with the intelligence reports coming out of East Germany, coming out of the Warsaw Pact, which was the Soviet Union's alliance in Eastern Europe. I would see these intelligence reports. My first assignment there for about 6 months, I was an engineer platoon leader, and get experience, as we call it, pushing troops. Then I went to battalion staff, and I was intelligence and security officer for a large service battalion. We were encouraged to travel into East Berlin. So we had to go through Checkpoint Charlie, as it was called. You've probably heard in state and history about Checkpoint Charlie. That was the entranceway between East and West Berlin. We would travel through that, travel through East Berlin. We had to be in Class A uniform, military Class A uniform. We were allowed to do anything. We were allowed to shop, dine at restaurants. And I remember going over once with my wife and another couple, and we had lunch at the premier restaurant in East Berlin called the Moscow Restaurant. And if you want to see people stop and stare, walk into the top Russian restaurant in East Berlin in an American Army uniform. They just stop and stared at us. Perfect service, great food, everything. Had some interesting experiences. As a lieutenant, you can be assigned extra duties. And this was a reinforced infantry brigade in Berlin. They would have tours come into Berlin from West Germany, soldiers, and they'd take them on a bus tour of East Berlin. Well, they had to have an officer in charge. It was a duty roster, and I got assigned to ride the bus. That's all I had to do. And one of my soldiers from the engineer company was the driver of the bus. He was a professional driver. Well, Checkpoint Charlie was not straight through. It was a maze, a traffic maze, very narrow. That was to keep people from running it from the east side. So you mean they get caught up in there. There's not a whole lot of space between these big concrete barrier walls and that bus. Well, going through, got the back bumper of that bus scraped up against the concrete. I didn't know anything about it until I got back. It was an international incident. And I get off the bus, and it wasn't the East Germans or the Russians that were hassling me, it was my own people. Why did I allow that driver to do that? What did I do? So the worst thing was, they put me into a vehicle, took me to brigade headquarters, my own headquarters, interrogated me, and all I kept saying was, this was 7 o'clock in the evening. Please let me call my wife and tell her I'm going to be late for dinner. No. So of course I got double jeopardy. When I showed up at 8 o'clock without having called my wife, I got to 3rd degree, because that was a no-no. I had to keep her informed. So I don't ever want to do this again. Never ever want to go through this again. About 2 months later, I come up on the duty roster again. I'm in a panic. Oh no. We get on the bus. We got through Checkpoint Charlie, fine. We're riding around, and it was a 4-lane cobblestone street in East Berlin, and with a median in the center. And we were going to make a U-turn to come around and change direction. And I look over, and there is a Soviet military bus. Looks like a school bus, but it's got big channel iron bumpers on it. You know, it looks like a school bus out of the 50s. And it's making a turn the other way. And didn't I hear a crunch? Oh God, I don't believe this. We just hit a Russian bus. Oh no, they're never going to see me again. They're never going to see this poor second lieutenant again. So I get out of the bus, and out of the Russian bus gets a Russian second lieutenant, who's probably no more than my age, and I was about 22 at that time. And he's scared to death. And we're checking it out. Sign language. I don't speak any Ruski, he doesn't speak any English. And there we are, looking, there's no damage. No damage. And we went. Shook hands on it. He got back on the bus, I got back on the bus, and we took off. And I turned around to these guys, I said, there's no mention of this to anybody. Don't ever mention it. 10 years from now, you can tell the story. 10 years from now, nothing was ever said. I thought, oh my gosh. But anyway, that's some of the things. And another one that I can remember in Berlin, we had to do, we called it a G2 run. G2 is intelligence. And we would again be put on a duty roster, and we would have to ride with a professional driver from counterintelligence who drove old souped up Ford LTDs with bulletproof glass. These were specially designed cars, so if we got hassled, we could try to get away from the Stasi that was chasing us or whatever. And this was at night. So I was on from midnight or 11 o'clock in the evening till like 7 in the morning. You had to be in that car. So you had to make sure you didn't have any emergencies. The driver says to me, "Sir, I'm going to ask a favor of you." He says, "You know, this is Super Bowl night." And I said, "Oh, that's right. He said, "Can I take my transistor radio with me so we can listen on Armed Forces radio to the Super Bowl?" The Super Bowl was Super Bowl III, when the New York Jets upset the Baltimore Colts with Joe Namath as quarterback. Now, infamous, it's the first time the American Football League won anything like that. Well, there I was, riding around East Berlin, being followed by their counterintelligence and spies and everything. We're listening to the Super Bowl. Just heard the entire Super Bowl while I was on that G2 run in East Berlin. Another one, probably in Berlin, this was in August of 1968. There was unrest in the Warsaw Pact, especially the country of Czechoslovakia. They were having riots at home to get rid of the Soviet dominance. They had a president elected, Alexander Dubček, that was pushing to pull Czechoslovakia out of the Warsaw Pact. And on Sunday afternoon, I prepared the barbecue on the balcony of our apartment. Beautiful, nice, I think it was 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. The phone rang. And when I answered it, I must have gotten the weirdest expression. The weirdest expression. And my wife said, "What is it?" I said, "I've got to make another call, I'll tell you." It was phone tree. No such thing as cell phones and stuff. We had a phone tree. You took the phone call, you called the next guy on the list. And I turned around to her and I said, "The code word is Raging Bull." She said, "Wait a minute. That's full-blown alert." I said, "Yes. You are to pack a bag and wait the evacuation in instructions." She said, "But I don't." I said, "No question. You pack a bag. You've had the briefings. You have everything. Pack a bag. I'll be in touch." And then jumped into my fatigues. Went to grabbed my bag that I kept, emergency bag, and reported to my unit, the battalion headquarters. Well, my immediate job when I got there was to encode the radio encryption equipment. It was all classified, and I had the highest level classification, the crypto class, that I had to open a safe. I'd get these extracts out, and I would program these different cassettes. They look like an 8-track cassette almost. You'd open them up and you'd slide things and you'd put all the numbers and letters in there, and that would give secure radio. That's something that's very common today. Radio can be encrypted. It wasn't. It was very highly classified at that time, so we could encrypt. So I got that. So when I did that, I handed my clerk my weapons card. Everybody carried a weapons card. That was your receipt for the weapon that was kept in the arms room. And he went over to get my 45 for me. And Herb came back. He's got a strange look on his face. And I had done my job with the encryption. And he handed me my 45. And he handed me my basic load of ammunition. And they never issued ammunition. And I went, "Oh," he said, "Sir, you are to load your magazines. You are to lock and load. That's the orders." Okay. So I holstered my 45. And I figured, well, I'm going to have to get some other gear out, So I was in full web gear at the time, full web gear, steel pot, the whole bit. And we were to wait deployment. We went to our deployment area in Berlin, and what we found out, the Soviet Union was sending people into Czechoslovakia to crush the revolt at all means. And if you've ever seen films, the country of Hungary tried this in 1956, and the Soviets sent in tanks and slaughtered all kinds of Hungarian people. They were doing that with the Slovaks. Tanks rolled the streets of Prague. Our gardener at our apartment complex, his girlfriend was in Prague, and he told people he's going back to Prague to get his girlfriend out. We never saw the guy again. Don't know whatever happened. Alexander Dubček, the president, disappeared, never to be seen again. He probably died in Siberia. But what was happening, there were multiple combat divisions moving all around Berlin. We had no idea what was going on. The American Army in West Germany locked and loaded, and tanks rolled right to the border, right to the Iron Curtain, with tanks locked and loaded, ready to roll. Our tanks in Berlin were locked and loaded if they had to. We were all armed, fully armed, everything. And I was called into the intelligence room, which was three floors underground of brigade headquarters, and watched for the next 3 days them chart the movement of all these Warsaw Pact divisions. And one of the cute ones that happened, there was 2 Polish divisions moving south to Czechoslovakia, and the underground turned all of the road signs around ahead of these 2 Polish divisions moving south. It turned them around 180 degrees. What happened? These Polish divisions got disoriented and got turned around completely. You're talking 10,000 troops a division, so you're talking 20,000 troops with armor, mechanized, everything. Got completely turned around on the Autobahn and ended up back. They were 30 kilometers back in Poland before they realized they were going the wrong direction. And we were watching this. They were charting it. We had intelligence reports all about spies coming back telling us where all these divisions were. And we're going, what's going on? Why did they turn around all of a sudden? Because the underground turned the road signs around. My tour in Berlin ended in June of '69. I got levied, as they called it. I had my tour cut short. It was originally on orders for Vietnam. And how they found this out, I don't know. My brother was in Vietnam at the time. And they would not send 2 brothers to Vietnam at the same time unless they specifically requested it. So they switched my orders. I went to Korea. And I was assigned to a construction engineer battalion. I was a unit commander, a company commander, and it was called the Equipment and Maintenance Support Company. I had just about every type of construction equipment you could ever imagine. I had the asphalt plant. I had the concrete batch plant. We did road building and airfield building. I had the rock quarry. We had 2 complete crushing and screening plants for crushing rock for the battalion to use. I was the demolitions person. I was the one who supervised the drilling and capping of the explosives to bring down the face wall, so we would have rock to put into the crushers. We did that once a week, and they had to have an officer that would train specifically, and I was specifically trained explosives and demolitions. I had, I'm trying to think, all told, if I remember, I had 8 Caterpillar D70 dozers. I had 8 graders. I had 4 12.5-ton crawler-mounted crane shovels. I had 2 40-ton crawler-mounted crane shovels, the big ones. You name it, I had all this all under, and I would assign that out to the line units who were building things, and we would send operators with it. It was an interesting assignment. I got to see most all of Korea, and although this was 1969, and Korea is in the news right now, big time. With North Korea. There were things going on at that time that were not reported. During 1968 to 1970, there were over 100 American soldiers killed in action along the DMZ. Panmunjom and that DMZ never reported because they were having so many casualties in Vietnam. President Nixon did not want the added burden of people saying, we're having GIs killed on on two fronts. We did construction projects up around the DMZ. I never had an injury, never had a death, but we did have vehicles, construction equipment, and trucks come back with bullet holes in them that we had to patch the bullet holes. And we were told, patch them up, don't say a word. Yeah, we were not supposed to be taking fire at that time, but we did. I put the airfield overruns, as we called them, at Osan Air Base, and Osan Air Base is still there. And we were building and extending the runway to bring it up to what's called C5A capacity. That's the big cargo plane. That's the ones they bring into Dover. They're real big, and they are huge. The inside cargo bay on one of those is the size of a football field. Yeah, they are huge. When we finished it up, I said I wanted to be there to see that first C5A land. I want to make sure it didn't crash. And so far as I know, no C5A has ever crashed at Osan Air Base. Well, then from there, I was transferred back to Germany, and I had a facilities engineering assignment where I would work with Germans. And that was probably one of the more stressful assignments, because we were trying to do so much with so little money, keeping facilities in order, keeping people happy. My emphasis was on military family housing, and I traveled all over the state of Hesse, which surrounds Frankfurt. When I was in Frankfurt, I got a lot of travel throughout Europe. That's when I saw Rome. That's when I saw London. Couldn't see Prague because they still had the Iron Curtain, but I traveled all over Germany. Saw Belgium, Holland. I made it to Amsterdam, Brussels, Luxembourg, Paris. Yes, so it gave me the chance to really travel that I would have never ever had I never gone into the Army. I left active duty in 1972, moved back to a place called Indiana, Pennsylvania to go to graduate school with the sheer purpose of finishing graduate school and leaving. 46 years later, I'm still living in the same house. Oh, how things can change. I thought I was totally done, but one of my graduate professors commanded a small reserve detachment in Johnstown, and he talked me into signing up. So I did, and went from there to the 458th Engineer Battalion in Johnstown. And it would used to be Company B in Indiana. That's the one right there on North 4th Street, Company B, 458th. They have redesignated, it's now the 420th Engineer Company, but it's still part of the 458th Engineer Battalion. So my first job, I commanded the headquarters company for 3 years, or actually 3.5 years, and gained a kinship with that outfit. I still belong to their alumni association, and we have a picnic in Nanny Glow each year, each summer, that I can meet with the guys that I met 40 some years ago, and we're still buddies. My time in the reserves was just that time. Had it been slanted 5 years beyond, I'd have been called up. I was never called up for extended activation, because I was finishing up right about the time of Desert Storm in Iraq. So, and plus the fact they did not need engineer officers. So had I volunteered, I could have gone. And if I'd have volunteered, I'd have lost my wife sooner than I lost her. She'd have moved out. For the last 13 years I was in the Army, I was an instructor, professional instructor for the Army. For 6 years, I taught engineer courses at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, for the Engineer Officer Advanced course. I taught things like barrier and obstacle design, which include putting in minefields. I taught explosives and demolitions and quarry blasting. I taught interior electrical design. I taught basic bridge design. It's totally out of my realm of, civilian job. And one of the ones, they wanted me teaching quarry blasting. I was the only one left in the whole United States Army that had done active quarry blasting. Everybody else read it out of books, because in the States, you can't do that. You can't run a quarry. There's federal laws that says you can't interfere with a job that might be a union job. So anyway, I would teach that. I taught that 3 straight years, and I would run the Demolition Range on South Post of Fort Belvoir. Now, they no longer have the engineer school at Fort Belvoir. It has been moved to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. Reason being, they had too much encroachment of civilization on Fort Belvoir. By that, houses were being built too close. To give you an example, the last time I ran the Demolition Range on South Post, this was an NCO, a sergeant's course, that I was teaching demolitions, how to prime explosives, how to set up ring mains, how to use detonation cord, the whole bit. And we were limited to a 25-pound limit per blast. So we had 25 1-pound blocks of C4 or TNT, and we could fire them. And it's very, very controlled. Range control gives me the okay when to go ahead and tell them they can fire. We fired our first 4 shots of 25 pounds, and phone's ringing in the bunker. And it's range control back on post, and this guy's screaming at me, "How many shots have you fired?" I said, 4. He says, "How big?" 25 pounds each. Cut it back. 15-pound max. Oh no. And said, we're going to be out there all day trying to fire off all the explosives. I says, why? You just knocked out 5 picture windows in Woodbridge, Virginia. 5 miles away. Shattered big picture windows in people's homes. That's why they moved it out of there. Finished my officer advanced course assignment. I was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel, and I was assigned to the United States Army Command and General Staff College out of Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And that's the Army's highest level command and staff course. And I taught that for 7 years. I'd go out to Leavenworth, I'd fly out there temporary duty, or I would go to Dover, Delaware, and the Army would lease Wesley College in Dover, Delaware for an entire summer to teach reservists and guardsmen coming in the coursework for the Army Command and General Staff College. I'd go in there for 2 weeks, and it was a wonderful tour. I kind of laugh about it. I wore a Class A uniform in an air-conditioned classroom. I would say it's a dirty job, but somebody had to go do it. I was right next to the Chesapeake Bay, and I love seafood. If you've ever had crabs at a Chesapeake Bay seafood crab house, it doesn't get any better than that. And at the end of 27 years. Well, actually, I left that assignment in 1990, and I went into what's called the control group. That's out of St. Louis. I was in active reserve, but I could still gain points for retirement. So I actually retired in 1994, and it was. I missed it when I finally hung it up.